Welcome, everyone. I'm really pleased to welcome everybody today to what promises to be a fantastic session on how and why to keep active when you have JIA, with practical information that's sure to be useful for everyone. This session is another one of sessions in the virtual education series that's sponsored by Cassie and Friends. My name is Lori Tucker, and I'm a pediatric rheumatologist from Vancouver, BC. And I'm really delighted to be the moderator of this session today for several reasons. Firstly, I think this is a super important topic, and we're really fortunate to have three fantastic speakers, which we'll tell you about in a few minutes. Secondly, this topic is really near and dear to my heart because together with my pediatric rheumatology colleagues across Canada, I've been working on research relating to physical activity and JIA for the past number of years. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. So welcome, everyone. Next slide. So we're really delighted to be here today with people from all over Canada and some friends from the US and other countries. Today we have a number of people represented from 33 cities and 5 countries. Please do feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from in the chat. Next slide. So I'm going to take a few seconds to tell you about the LEAP project that I mentioned earlier. LEAP stands for Linking Exercise, Activity, and Pathophysiology in Canadian Children with Juvenile Arthritis. That's a mouthful. This project is a Canadian research project that was funded by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, aimed at learning about physical activity in kids with JIA, promoters and barriers, and understanding the interactions between their disease and physical activity. Next slide. So what did we do? Next slide. What did we do in this project? Well, there were 711 participants, and these were kids between 8 and 16 years old from across Canada. They were in the study for 2 years, so we could follow them over time. And we collected a whole bunch of information about their JIA, about their disease activity and joints involved in treatments. Kids and parents completed questionnaires about physical activity at every visit. Some kids in the study got to do muscle strength testing and some super fancy bone composition testing, and some kids gave us blood tests for biomarker testing. Next slide. This map shows you all the centers. These are pediatric rheumatology centers from across Canada who participated in the LEAP project. We are just now starting to analyze the large amount of data that we've collected from this study, and we have some really early results to share with you today. Next slide. So what we've learned so far is that children and teens with JIA have lower physical activity than their healthy peers, and we knew this. But we also now know that active disease periods is when they have lower physical activity. We also learned that fatigue, more than pain, is a barrier to physical activity in kids with JIA. And parents have a role to play. We learned that children whose parents were more physically active were actually more active themselves. So it's possible that parents can help their children with JIA by being more active themselves. We're going to be publishing more of this information and looking at the effects of JIA and physical activity on muscle and bone development and strength in the next year. And we really hope we'll be able to share this information with all of you through Cassie and Friends and other channels. Next slide. So we really hope that you will have lots of questions that will come up during this session. There's going to be lots of time for questions at the end of the formal presentations. If you have a question, submit it using the Q&A button below. We'll try to have all the questions answered today, but if your question isn't answered today, our speakers will post the answers on the resource section of the Cassie and Friends website later. Next slide. I'm really, really fortunate to tell you a bit about our speakers. Ryan Decker is our youth speaker. He was diagnosed with JIA at age 14 years, having had some symptoms just prior to that for several years. Needless to say, this very active young man faced a lot of challenges in remaining active and achieving his goals after his diagnosis. And I know he has some really important things and information to share with you today. After Ryan speaks, we're really fortunate to have Dr. Kristen Houghton and Astrid D'Souza with us. Kristen is a pediatric rheumatologist and a sports medicine specialist working in our center at the BC Children's Hospital in Vancouver. She's been involved in many national programs and initiatives that relate to healthy active living and sports medicine as it relates to kids with chronic diseases. She has a sports medicine practice. She works with our orthopedic colleagues here in a new combined clinic, and she finds time to be physically active herself and coach her son's soccer team. Astrid D'Souza is a clinical exercise physiologist who studied at the University of British Columbia and has been working in the Children's Heart Center at the BC Children's Hospital for the past few years. She's a master at exercise testing, exercise prescription, and rehabilitation in children with chronic diseases. And I know that she's really passionate about teaching patients and families about the benefits of physical activity and how they can use this as a tool to improve their outcomes and their quality of life. And I think we're super lucky to have both of them here today to speak to us. So I'm going to turn this session over now to Ryan. So take it away.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining the call today. I'm super excited to be able to share my story, but be also able to share some tips and tricks about something that's been super important to me, both with just my general day-to-day life, but also what played such a huge role in my recovery and my journey throughout JA. Want to start off and give you a bit of a background as to my early days with JA and kind of the diagnosis I received. And so, when I was around 12 or 13 years old, I lived a pretty normal life. I was big into sports, playing soccer, playing football, just had a normal life like any kid would at around grade 7. Until at that time, I started noticing a little bit of stiffness and back pain, hamstrings, lower back, you name it. And since I was so active with sports, it was kind of always brushed off. It's a sports injury. Try some more stretching. You've got some tight hamstrings and you name it. So even though despite a bunch of doctor's appointments and mislabeled kinds of conditions, I ended up having JA undiagnosed for a couple of years. It wasn't until I was in and around 14 years old where I ran into a random clinic, and luckily enough, somehow the doctor that I saw also had ankylosing spondylitis, which is what I was diagnosed with. It was a bit of a fluke, but something that I've always been grateful for, because he pretty much listened to my symptoms and diagnosed me on the spot without any sort of testing. And throughout the testing that was prescribed from there, I was able to get an official diagnosis with juvenile arthritis, in specific ankylosing spondylitis, so the arthritis of the lower back and the spine. And so for someone that is 14, just trying to find themselves through high school, this was definitely a tough pill to swallow, let alone I couldn't even pronounce what I was diagnosed with to start off. And so, it was a bit of a shock. And as someone that was always active, again, playing sports, soccer and football were a huge part of my life, I was immediately concerned as to what that would look like going forward. At the time, I was already limping. It was very difficult for me to participate in PE and those kinds of things through high school already. And I was concerned that it was going to get worse. And so luckily, obviously, there was the modern medications that we have now. So I started a treatment plan, started on prednisone, NSAIDs and all those kinds of things. But unfortunately, my condition worsened at first. And I did have to quit playing all of the sports that I grew up playing and loved doing, and the kind of highlight of my life at the time. I had to take a complete break, had to stop. And so that was a difficult part of my journey as well. And, it took a lot of determination to get back to where I was prior to my diagnosis and get back to feeling healthy. But again, through, the trials and errors of all the medication and the right prescription, getting onto some biologics, I was able to, luckily rejoin those sports that kept me healthy and kept me active going forward. And so through that process, I learned, through quitting sports and through just staying at home, sitting on the couch, I found that that really made my condition significantly worse than if I just tried and if I just did a little bit of activity, whether it be a walk or a run. I found that, stopping everything cold turkey actually was probably one of the worst decisions I could have made. And so getting back into sports, luckily with the help of that medication, really kept me healthy and kept me moving, which taught me a lot about that kind of phrase, motion is lotion. I didn't fully understand that when it was first explained to me, and it's a bit cliche, but I found that to be completely true. That on the days where I'm moving around, I'm at least doing something. My conditions are significantly better than if I'm just lying around on the couch and, hoping to get better and not really putting any physical effort towards it other than, taking the medications and taking those kinds of steps. And so the gym came into my life, in and around the time where I was starting to feel a bit better. I was getting back into sports. Uh, my first initial experience into the gym was in just about grade 11, where I took a weight training course in high school. And at the time, any kid's a little bit nervous to step into the gym, especially someone that has a compromised, skeletal system. It doesn't sound like the best idea. But little did I know, it was probably one of the best things I could have done. And it really took my journey to getting better, like it really amped it up. So, you know, it was nerve-wracking to step into that space. I was lucky enough to do it with a couple high school friends, and that really helped out, trying to navigate, figure out the gym, what the equipment does, how to not hurt yourself, what movements to do, how to even structure a routine. I was lucky to figure a lot of that out, trial and error, in that class. So I can't recommend enough doing something like that to start off, and I'll get into some recommendations as well. But that was my introduction. I was still playing sports. Luckily enough, through working at the gym, stretching, and taking the medication, I was able to continue playing sports after high school. I played a little bit of junior football in the CJFL, so I did that a little while. But it was destined to happen, and sports came to an end. And I kind of found myself relapsing a little bit at that time, because that's what really kept me active. It really kept my condition under wraps, because I was always moving around. I was motivated, playing sports 4 or 5 times a week, especially in junior football. It took up a lot of my time, which was a good thing. And so I kind of had to figure out what I was going to do going forward. Eventually, high school sports, university sports are going to come to an end. And so that's where I really dived into the gym at that point. And I'm excited to kind of give you guys some tips as to what I found worked for me as someone that still obviously battles with arthritis, juvenile arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis. But when I jumped into that gym, I actually achieved a level of fitness that I was never able to get to even before my diagnosis, before even playing sports, during playing sports. I found that it was the perfect activity for someone with my condition. And if you look at it, it doesn't really sound like it is, but honestly, I found that it was the perfect thing I could have been doing. In specific, there with the gym, a lot of things that I found worked for me was one, the condition improvement, of course, the strengthening, doing weight training. Again, it was a huge trial and error, and it took a lot of error to figure out what was actually good for me and good for my condition in specific. But I found with the resistance training in specific was huge. I was able to strengthen a lot of the areas that supported my condition. So obviously, my lower back was a little bit painful and stiff, and didn't have the best range of motion. So through that, I was able to strengthen my core, my lower back muscles, and those really help support my day-to-day lifestyle, and really help reduce a lot of that stiffness and that pain that I would feel on the day-to-day. And so, through going to the gym, having that flexibility with the gym, not only improved my physical standpoint with my condition and how I felt, but also there was tons of mental improvement I found, that were a bit of a shock to me, and a bit of a kind of a secondary benefit for going to the gym, is where I really got a lot of confidence. I really had a better sense of mood. I had a better energy. You'll find that with arthritis and taking medications, there's a lot of fatigue that happens. And those days that I'm going to the gym, I can almost tell you 100% of the time, I'm going to feel much better, both on the physical and the mental side, once I'm done with that session, even though it might be hard to get into it or I don't want to go at first. Once I'm done with that session, it really kind of brightens the day, helps the mood, and also helps my condition as well. So I found through all of those things, it was a huge benefit. I can't recommend it enough for somebody that's going through anything similar to what I experienced. And the only regret that I had was not starting it even earlier than I did. So, since then, I've been blessed enough and healthy enough to do things, like I said, that I wouldn't have even thought possible before I had the condition. I joke around and say, my condition, it kind of motivates me to stay healthy, to stay fit. And I'm actually more fit and more well off than I would have been without it. It's just kind of that constant motivator in the back of my head where I say, you know what? I got to do this for me. I got to do this for my physical well-being. I have a condition. Let's use this as a motivator to make sure I'm staying up to date with workouts. I'm getting that range of motion in every day, because once it's gone, it's hard to get it back. So, I was lucky enough to do half marathons through Cassie and Friends, the Vancouver and Whistler Grand Fondo. You'll see on the top left-hand side there. And again, those are things that challenges that I like to do for myself, just to make sure that I'm still able to do the things and I'm not letting everything kind of take away from what I've done in my life. And yeah, I've always kind of looked at it in a sense where I don't want to have this condition kind of define who I am or stop me from going to the gym or stop me from doing certain challenges. And again, yeah, it's just been a great motivator, and the gym has been the avenue for me to continue working on myself and continue challenging myself day to day through my young life here. So if we go to the next slide, just some tips that I've put down for everybody here. These are things that through trial and error, again, that I found have been huge. Number one, you'll see there is gear. One thing that I realize is that, everyone that goes to the gym has different conditions. They're in different, not only just like physical abilities, but also you'll find people that are going to the gym that have their own conditions, have their own problems, and everybody's there just working on themselves. And a lot of people actually use gear that I used and that I incorporated into my workouts from day one. And so things that I used were things like a lifting belt. I learned how to use that right away. Again, there's so many YouTube videos, TikToks these days. It's a trendy thing to go to the gym these days, much more than when I was starting to go. Lifting belt was huge. It supports your lower back, which is just what I needed. And the best part about that is I'm not standing out. You'll see lifting belts all around the gym, everywhere. Big bodybuilders use them, to people that are doing some lighter movements like what I would have been doing. So, by using these supports, wrist straps for people with RA and those kinds of conditions, with arthritis in the hands, good compression, wrist support, hand support. And again, so many people are using those aids in the gym. So it's not like, you're taking this extra step that no one else is doing, gloves, those kinds of things. Gear was huge. And you'd be surprised going into the gym, seeing the range of people that are there. Everybody's working on themselves. No one's looking at you. No one's, judging you. So that was a big help in terms of making sure I got the lifts in while also staying comfortable when I'm having a not so nice day. So that's one thing. Exercises that I was doing, it really comes down to flexibility. The gym, it's the most flexible thing you can do in terms of a workout and getting some movement in. You could do a cardio day. You could get on a stair climber. You can get on a treadmill. You could do some lightweight training to heavyweight training. And so really I tried to line that up with how I felt on any given day. Arthritis is a thing that's a roller coaster. It's up and down. Some weeks are better than others. Some days are better than others. And so I was really able to adapt my workout to how I was feeling that day, just so I didn't have to sit off every time that I felt a little bit bad. I made sure I stayed true to my plan, and I would just go to the gym still, but I would maybe take an easier day. At least I still got it in, and I'm still comfortable based on how I'm feeling. So exercises, low impact, things like that. You can really kind of structure your workout to how you're feeling completely. That was huge. Target movements, again, there is so much content out there. Some people are lucky enough to start off with a personal trainer. Unfortunately, I wasn't. It was all self-taught. But there's so many YouTube videos. If you have something you want to work on, some specific pain that you have, you can jump on YouTube and find exercises that are going to work and help out with that specific area that you want to target. Also, routines. There's so much out there on the internet that you can find. So you can target certain things, and you can also look up beginner exercises for people with your specific condition to help get that full range of motion, help strengthen those areas that are going to be important for you, and strengthen those joints that might be a little bit weakened from what you've gone through. I knew that was huge. Again, strengthening my core, strengthening my lower back, my legs. It really helped me out in feeling less pain on the day to day. One thing that they prescribe is exercise for back pain, and I found that that couldn't have been more true, and that couldn't have worked even better for someone in my spot. I found that going to the gym, it was all about kind of pushing myself in a sense, but also not going overboard. So, I fall for that category too, where I might have taken a few days where I pushed it a little bit too hard, but I also didn't want to make it an excuse. So that's kind of the balance that's good to find is, you don't want to have this condition just stop you from doing everything that you want to do. You actually want to use it as a motivator, but you also want to listen to your body at the end of the day as well. So that's super important. Moving on to the next one there, you'll see stretching. I was 14 years old, so obviously I wasn't the most keen on a daily stretching task and activity. But what I found is, incorporating that into a workout, I was much more receptive to it because I knew it was a part of my routine. I was going for strength, I was going for hypertrophy, and stretching is important for going to the gym. And so, since it was a part of my gym routine, I made sure I got it in. Otherwise, I would not have. As much as my PT told me it's super important. It just wasn't those things. It wasn't top of mind for me. I was a young kid. But now that I'm going to the gym, it's an easy thing to do. Everybody does it. A good warm up and a good warm down in between those workouts are super important. And also, again, timing. So, again, moving into that flexibility, timing is key too. I know for someone like myself, morning stiffness was something that I've battled with quite a bit in the past. It's something I still battle with. So for me personally, I choose to go to the gym at the afternoon or after work. Night times is when I feel best. And again, that's the flexibility. I can choose when I go to the gym. I can choose which days I take off. And so, working out at night worked well for me. Working out on different specific areas based off of how my body was feeling every day also worked out. And so through all of that, I was able to achieve, again, a level of fitness that I didn't really think was possible, especially for someone that, had so many issues so early on. So, if I was to put any last piece of advice on it, it would be to, push yourself. No one's an expert gym goer from day one. No one's born that way. There's going to be trial and error, and it's going to feel hard to get started. It's just taking that first step and taking the chance and keep into a routine. And one day you'll just find yourself going every day or every 4 days a week, and it'll just be a part of your lifestyle, and you won't think twice. So thanks so much for listening to me, guys. I'm looking forward to answering any questions you have, and I'll pass it back to the leaders here.
Our next speaker is Dr. David Cabral, and Dr. Kristen Houghton. She's going to turn her slides on now.
Okay, I hope everybody can hear me. So my name is Kristen, and I'm going to be giving this presentation with Astrid. So I'm just going to introduce our topic, and then Astrid's going to begin, and Astrid and I will go back and forth and share our thoughts on strength training. So the title is Hitting the Gym with Juvenile Arthritis and Pediatric Rheumatic Diseases. Take it away, Astrid.
Okay. So I just can't see your slides, Kristen. Is that me? No. That's okay. If I can't see them, I'll just do them.
No, they should be there. Use the same.
Okay.
I don't think anyone can see them, so maybe just try to unshare and then reshare.
Okay. You see them now?
Oh, perfect.
Okay, sorry about that, everyone. Here we go.
So thanks so much for asking me to join in this conversation about one of my favorite topics, which is exercise. And what I even like to talk about more than exercise is resistance training. So I'm super stoked to be here and have this conversation with you. I always like to start this conversation with talking about physical activity as a whole and exercise as a whole, and why we do it. And so we know that physical activity is not only important for kids in their growth and development, it's also important as they become adults, and for all of us who are adults. So in kids, we know that physical activity can help academic performance and brain health. We know that there's lots of benefits to the heart and the lungs. And then it helps us maintain blood sugar and maintain healthy body composition and weight. And then also really contributes to our long-term health. And then also what we see in that figure on the left is that it really can help build strong muscles. So what we call muscular fitness. The other thing that's really important to understand when we talk about physical activity in childhood is that the habits that we form in childhood are often with us as we get a little bit older. And as Dr. Tucker was talking about earlier, the physical activity of parents often affects the physical activity of children. So it's this full circle kind of of benefit to physical activity. Next slide. So the WHO, so the World Health Organization, and the Canadian Society of Exercise Physiology recommends that children or youth should be active on most days of the week. They should be getting about 60 minutes or more of activity per day. Now, this doesn't necessarily need to be exercise, like super intense exercise. We can accumulate it at different times of the day. We can do it in 10 to 15 minute bouts. And then I really like how the Canadian Society of Exercise Physiology kind of puts this whole concept together. So it kind of looks at how do we compose our 24 hours of the day? So not only is it about the exercise that we do, which they've termed sweat, it matters also how many steps we get during the day, like how active we are through the day. We also want to think about the sleep that we're getting. And then we also want to try and reduce the sedentary time. So meaning our time spent in front of screens, TVs, computers, and so forth. Next slide. I also really like this concept of what we call physical literacy. And physical literacy is really a concept around kids gaining skills at a young age that are going to keep them active throughout their lifespan. And it's really based on 4 things. It's based on what we call physical competence, or your ability to do exercise. It's based on our engagement in physical activity. So what are we involved in as children and youth? It's about building skills and motivation and confidence. And then a knowledge and understanding of why we're involved in physical activity, exercise, and as we're going to talk about today, resistance training. Next slide.
Okay, so Astrid, thank you for that nice introduction about the importance of physical activity and starting when we're younger. Lots of people have questions about strength training in particular. Can you define for us what strength training is to an exercise physiologist?
Yeah. In its simplest form, I think that strength training is anything we do when we're exerting a force against a resistance. And I think it can be done in so many different ways. You know, Ryan talked about, you know, well, he showed pictures of the gym and doing lots of like heavy lifting and being focused on hypertrophy, is lots of teenager boys and start out with. But we can also do things like body weight exercises. We can do resistance bands. We can do pulleys, weight machines, free weights. All sorts of different things can help us build strength. Even things like yoga and Pilates can really help build strength as well.
Another common question that parents and kids and teenagers have is, when can they start strength training? So what do you say as far as an age when is reasonable for a child to begin strength training?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the kid. I think it's a lot about how well they follow instructions. I've been involved in strength and conditioning coaching for a variety of different sports, but I've actually started as young as 5 to 6 year olds who were involved in a figure skating program. And really there, it's about teaching a little bit about form, but they're 5 and 6 years old, so that can be a little bit of a challenge. And mostly the focus when they're that age is to do body weight exercises and just introduce the concept of different types of exercise that don't necessarily need to be running and jumping and so on. So I have done it in kids that are as young as 5 to 6. Generally, we say, you know, around 7 to 8, and really they've got to be able to follow directions. But the other thing to think about is that resistance training is often a part of so many things. It's part of our PE classes. Like I said, when I'm, you know, coaching, when I've coached strength and conditioning, coached in figure skating, I've done some strength training. And even when I've coached field hockey, you know, things like a plank are strength moves. And so they can be incorporated into different practices and so on.
Right. Excellent. Another common question is about safety, particularly when thinking about a gym and equipment. So what are your thoughts on the safety of strength training?
Yeah, I think generally injury rates in when strength training or resistance training are low, and they're lower actually than other sports in general play. I think the risk of injury comes when people are trying to do too much too soon. And I think that there was this concept in the old world of resistance training stunted growth and so forth. But I think we've started to dispel that and dispel those myths. And I just think that recognizing, you know, learning proper form is super, super important to make strength training safe. I think other considerations to think about are we getting adequate fluids and nutrition for not only exercise, but for recovery and growth. Generally, we recommend that resistance training is done 2 to 3 days per week. And so that allows time for rest and recovery. So we try and give 1 to 2 days of rest between each resistance training workout. And this not only allows for physical recovery, but also mental recovery as well.
Excellent. So you spoke about the benefits of physical activity, including some muscular fitness, bone strength. And more specifically, can you review the benefits of strength training?
Yeah, sure. So, like I said, the biggest benefits are around muscular strength and endurance. When I think about strength training, I think of it like a cup. So we're a cup, and if we strength train more and we have more strength, we have a bigger cup to work with. And I feel like that really helps in anything that we're doing, whether that be a cardio type of activity, whether that it can be anything, but I just think it gives us a little bit more to work with. So I think having muscular strength and endurance is obviously the biggest benefit. Bone health is another big one. And so some of the things that we don't really think about is that most of our bone health, most of our development of bone happens as we're children and youth. And so the importance of doing weight-bearing exercise is really important for our bone health. Doing strength training is also super important for our bone health, and really, really important as we get older in age to try and minimize some of the bone loss that naturally happens with age. I think the healthy weight thing is an interesting thing. I think people often think about, and I know I've heard this from girls that I've coached before, they talk a lot about, oh, I don't want to get too big, or, you know, I just want to do cardio. And really, the benefits of strength training and maintaining weight are huge, and probably more important than just the cardio piece. The mental health piece is an interesting one. For me personally, when I'm involved in strength training, it's not just that mental health piece, it's expanding that to like my mind-body connection. So I'm so focused when I'm strength training on what my body's doing that it really just helps extricate everything else that's in my brain. And when I feel success in the gym from doing a lift or something like that, that overall is just so good for my mental health. As an athlete, coordination, movement, sport performance, all things that really benefit from strength training. And then for me, even personally, just injury prevention and rehabilitation of injuries have been big reasons for strength training.
Excellent. So another question that commonly gets asked is, it's obvious that there's huge benefit from doing strength training, but is it really for everyone? What if somebody comes to you and says, I'm not an athlete, why should I strength train?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, actually. But I think the benefits are huge for everyone, and I think it comes across the lifespan. I think what we see in 5 to 7 year olds is maybe just like exposure to a movement, but then what you start to see as they get a little bit older is more coordination with that movement. And then as we get older from there, you know, there's lots of benefits, which, like we've talked about a little bit earlier in the previous slides, the bone strength, the body composition, the psychological well-being, all of those things are really important. Decreasing cardiovascular risk, decreasing, you know, helping with blood sugar control and diabetes. All these things are reasons why strength training is actually for everyone.
And I think you've already answered the question that strength training can help with athlete sport performance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So if you have a child or teenager in front of you who's keen on starting some strength training, and maybe they have some questions, how do you guide them to start their strength training program?
Yeah, so I see this a lot in my work, and the first thing I often say is consult a professional. And the reason for that is because form is imperative. And I think that so many people in the gym do things that are not quite correct and kind of perpetuate injury. So I think learning how to do things with the correct form is the biggest focus when you're starting out. So I'd say consult a professional. The warm up and cool down, also super important. I'd say when you're starting and trying to focus on proper technique, you should be thinking about doing things like for 10 to 15 reps. Usually my initial prescription would be, you know, 3 to 5 sets or 2 to 3 sets, maybe first of 10 to 15 reps. And then as that gets a little bit better, you can do a few more sets. And then, you know, when you're at Ryan's stage, for example, where the focus is different, then you're going to be able to change your reps and sets. But at the beginning, it's all about emphasizing that proper technique, keeping it light, 10 to 15 reps. Make sure you're having fun doing it. And as I said earlier, ideally, we want to do this 2 to 3 days per week.
Okay. So often kids or teenagers and adults will have this plan that I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to get on this program, and maybe you start doing it and then something comes up, life gets busy and you're not able to get back to the gym. How do you get people motivated and keep them motivated, encourage them to keep up with these good habits?
Yeah, like I once was at a talk once, and the speaker was talking about mobilizing motivation. And one of the things that I think we tend to forget is motivation is a mental process, and it's something that links a thought or a feeling to an action. And so two of the things that I most commonly ask when I'm talking to teenagers is, how important is it for you to change? Like, every teenager seems to know that it's good for them to exercise. And then if you ask them why they're doing it or not doing it, they're like, well, I don't know. So the one thing I ask is, how important is it for you to change on a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10? And you can quickly figure out why you're exercising or why you're strength training based on that number. If your number is above 7, you can understand that it's really important for you to make a change. And so you can understand that those people who can rate their motive or their importance to change as a 7 out of 10, they're pretty like highly motivated to engage in that behavior. The second question I often ask is, how confident are you that you can make that change? Because sometimes people know it's super important, but then they rate their confidence that's low. And then what that invites you to think about are, what are some of the barriers to you being active or engaging in resistance training, for example. So, for example, if you come away from this conversation and you go, how important is it for you to change? Oh, well, Dr. Houghton told me it was really important to resistance train. So yeah, that's a 9 out of 10 for me. But you might say, if my next question to you was, how confident are you that you can make that change? You might say, oh, like a 2 or 3. And when you explore that conversation a little bit more, and we go through like, well, what are the barriers? Well, you might say, well, I've never had experience of the gym. Oh, I hate the gym. Oh, like, I just don't know what to do. So then we can work through, well, how do we get you to increase your confidence so that you can achieve this goal of like something that's really important to you? So I think when we have the conversation around motivation, 2 quick, easy questions: how important is it for you to change? And how confident are you that you can change?
Perfect. Thanks, Astrid. So this slide is just a sort of a review of what Astrid has been speaking to and going through some commonly held myths about resistance training in youth. So the first one, that resistance training can stunt bone growth. So we know that there's no negative effect on children's growth. And in fact, it can strengthen your bone health during those critical years of childhood and adolescence. Another common myth is that it's only for athletes and athletic performance, but we know that it offers other health benefits across the whole age spectrum for young children all the way through as we age and become older adults. I think there was often said that we should wait to strength train until close to puberty or pre-puberty, around age 12. But as Astrid described, really kids just have to be able to follow the directions and be able to do exercises safely. And usually that starts with body weight, and it can be as young as age 5 to 7. Another myth is that girls, or boys for that matter, can get bulky. So if it changes your physical appearance that maybe some people don't want, some people do want, the reality is for younger children, resistance training will make them stronger, but they usually don't gain muscle mass. They get stronger because of other more neuromuscular adaptations and motor unit recruitment, all these things that basically make the signals from their brain to their muscles be more efficient without adding on muscle bulk. Adding on muscle bulk is largely genetic and doesn't happen until past puberty. And then another myth is that it's unsafe. And I think Astrid has shown that can be very safe, in fact, safer than a lot of other activities that kids engage in on the playground or in other sports teams. And often that's because it's improving your strength, decreases your injury risk because you have this better balance between your strength and your flexibility. And kids who do just one sport all the time are actually at increased risk for exercise-induced injuries, or kids that don't exercise at all. So strength training is very important. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about strength training in kids with rheumatic disease.
Yeah, so Kristen, obviously I know a little bit about exercise and healthy populations, and in my work I do a lot of work with congenital heart disease, but I'm interested in understanding a little bit about strength training in juvenile arthritis and pediatric rheumatological diseases. So can youth with JA and PRD actually strength train?
Yeah, so the overwhelming answer is yes. There has been a number of studies, mostly in children with juvenile arthritis, but also in children with dermatomyositis and lupus. And studies show that regular physical activity and strength training can improve disease control, can importantly improve pain, which is often a concern for these kids, can improve fatigue. And sometimes that's a bit counterintuitive because sometimes people are so tired, they feel like they don't have the energy to exercise or strength train, when if they're able to incorporate that into their day, they actually feel more energetic. And Ryan spoke to that as well. And it can improve their quality of life.
And are there any special considerations if you have JIA or any rheumatological diseases?
There are, but the first thing I want to point out is that most children with juvenile arthritis or other pediatric rheumatic diseases can participate in most physical activity and sport. And the caveat to that is, as long as disease is well controlled. We know sport participation has tremendous benefits for kids, both for their physical health, their mental health, and then it also teaches them about teamwork and sportsmanship and empathy. And these are all valuable social skills that extend into other areas of their life. But not all sports are a good fit for all kids, and this is true for children who do not have a chronic illness like juvenile arthritis. For kids with arthritis, some kids might have delayed physical literacy, for example. They might have restricted range of motion of some joints that might make some sports or activities more challenging at different times in their lives. For example, if you have active wrist arthritis, a racket sport may not be the best choice at that point in time. Children with neck arthritis may be canceled to avoid contact sports. But in general, we aim to support kids in trying different sports, or sports sampling, as sports specialists call it. So they find something that they really love. And then if kids are passionate about a sport, then we do everything that we can to support them in being able to be successful. Sometimes this means they might have to take a break and do physiotherapy or rehabilitation exercises, or switch positions if they're having a disease flare. And I tend to frame this in the same way I would approach a child who had an injury. These are the things we need to do to get you better so you can get back doing what you love to do, but you stay active. So we just kind of pivot things a bit. And then along those lines, there's really very few absolute contraindications to exercise. When we think about exercise in general and all the different types of chronic diseases, fever is one, and usually people don't feel well when they have a fever. And then unstable heart disease, which fortunately doesn't affect many of our population, are the only absolute contraindications to exercise. Everybody else with chronic diseases can exercise. They may have some modifications.
That's great. So what do you actually do if you're in an arthritis flare?
So some of the recommendations we give if a child's having an arthritis flare include trying to use heat before strength training and stretching, because heat can help loosen up the muscles. So some kids might do their stretching or strengthening after having a hot bath, for example, or a shower. Certainly exercising muscle groups that aren't affected by the arthritis flare. So often children will have flare in one or two joints, sometimes multiple joints, but often it's in a regional area of the body and you can exercise the other part. And then also you can do exercises that work the muscles without moving the joint. So for example, if a child has knee arthritis, which is a fairly common joint to be affected, they can do exercises while keeping their leg straight and not bending their knee, just trying to push their knee down into the floor, for example, or the table where they're sitting, to actively work their quadricep muscles without irritating their knee joint.
And then what do you do if someone has a decreased range of motion?
So this is also a common problem. So our therapists will often advise doing the exercises within a comfortable range of motion. So meaning not to push it into a painful range. And then you can also do what's called active assisted exercises, where you use a piece of equipment to help move the muscles and joints. So an example of this might include rolling your hand on a ball to improve the range of motion at your wrist. Sometimes they'll use something to roll underneath your knee as well to help with the range of motion of the knee, for example. And then if you have a therapy team, if you're fortunate enough that you go to a team that also has occupational physiotherapists, then often they'll give more detailed and very specific to the individual child or teenager exercises. Otherwise, physicians will give some general guidance, and modifications for exercises may be needed as well. So when you look at this picture, you can see on the left, there's somebody doing plank with putting pressure through their wrists, which obviously would be quite sore if you had wrist arthritis or decreased range of motion. So modification, you can do it on your elbows, like the person in the middle. And then a further modification, if you don't quite have the strength, on the right, you can see somebody on their knees and their elbows. And this is all to promote the core strength. And sometimes I'll even suggest that kids do it up against a wall if they're worried they're not strong enough. So they can just put their forearms up against a wall. And as long as they're bracing using their abdominal muscles, they're getting a workout. And that's certainly, they feel more safe and secure doing it that way sometimes too.
Yeah. And then tell me a little bit about myositis, because I don't really know about it. And then what happens in a myositis flare?
Sure. So myositis causes inflammation in the muscles. It can cause muscle pain and weakness, and often fatigue is a big issue and makes it difficult to exercise. So often we recommend low resistance exercises. So doing things against low resistance. So that might be, if you're using TheraBands, using the least resistance for the TheraBand, for example. And then doing functional exercises. So doing things that are going to help you with your day-to-day activities. So if you're having difficulty with stairs, for example, then maybe doing some step-ups. If you're a common difficulty is getting up out of a chair. It actually requires a lot of strength to get up out of a chair. And so people can practice sitting in a chair, pushing themselves up. So sit to stand exercises. Which are more commonly used in older populations, but can certainly help with strength and with balance.
And then what do you do with heart, if you do have any heart or lung involvement?
Yeah, so fortunately not that common, but some youth with rheumatic diseases do have heart or lung involvement, and it can affect their ability to exercise. It's hard to be general about these conditions because they tend to be very specific to an individual child, but generally would start with a low intensity strength training, particularly if you're worried about blood pressure at all. And then for any high intensity training, in those instances, we would generally consult with an exercise specialist such as yourself, and it would really depend on the individual child's condition.
Great.
So getting stronger in kids and teenagers, some key points, just wanted to review. Strength training in youth leads to improved health and fitness. It can help rehabilitate from injuries. It can help rehabilitate from arthritis or other rheumatic disease flares. It can reduce your injury risk, improve your physical literacy. Strength training is not limited to lifting weights. Lots of opportunities to use your body weight or resistance exercises. And to do these programs at home, actually, you don't have to go to a gym, but it's important to learn how to do them properly with safe technique, and for younger children, having some supervision. And I hope we've shown you that youth with juvenile arthritis and other rheumatic diseases can safely participate in strength training, but they may need some modifications. We're happy to take questions now. We do have a little bit more information on some topics that we thought might come up in the questions, but we can leave that and go to the questions now.
Well, thank you so much for an amazing presentation. I think everyone, I'm sure everyone learned a lot, and you already answered a few questions that have come up in the question and answer area during your presentation. But let's get started with the questions. I think you might have answered this, but one person asked, should you exercise when your joints are sore? And how could you do that to help?
So should you exercise when your joints are sore? The short answer is yes, we should always try to be active, but you can begin with therapeutic exercises for those particular areas. So focusing more on your range of motion, your mobility, strengthening the muscles around the joints. And then I think Ryan alluded to this as well, but some kids, morning stiffness is a big problem. And if that's the case, then trying to exercise later in the day can be really helpful or a better strategy for them. Starting slowly, resting as necessary, and certainly limiting your activities within your pain limits. I don't know, Ryan, if you have anything else you want to add.
Yeah, for sure. It's a great question. It can feel uncomfortable, especially on days where joints are sore. I think if it's not to an extreme, I always try to push through it. Just because I find that after I do that activity, after I do that, workout or whatever it might be, it actually ends up typically feeling better. So just pushing through a little bit of that uncomfortableness typically pays off. But again, it's kind of on a case-to-case basis, and you kind of just have to listen to your body in a sense. But definitely a little bit of a push out to do something typically works out in the end, for sure.
Can I ask a question, Kristen? How do mobility exercises fall into that? Like, would mobility exercises be maybe like a place to start if you are quite sore? Or, just thinking about, might that help you? Might the mobility exercises help you do that thing that, like, ease some of the tension in the movement that you were trying to do?
Yeah, definitely. So mobility exercises, stretching can be really helpful when kids have a significant disease flare. They're generally not very comfortable and would not be exercising at those times. But doing some static stretching, so to just maintain the range of motion in their joints would be what we start with. So that just involves moving the muscle to the point, just that the range that's comfortable and holding it there. So like if I was stretching my elbow, I could do this and just hold it where it's comfortable. And that's nice and gentle. If they need help, somebody can support them with that and even do it that way. And then as people are feeling better, then you can move on to more dynamic stretches where you're actually using your muscles and doing movements that might be more joint specific or even activity specific, like a warm up you do for soccer, for example. You practice doing high kicks or martial arts. They practice particular movements before they get into it.
Great. One person asked a question, I think, which maybe all three of you could answer, which is, how would you advise parents to manage school sport teams or club sports, and what kind of accommodations should people consider asking for?
Kristen, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start with that. So generally, I recommend open communication with the child's teacher, with the child's coaches. Of course, that's up to the individual child and parent. But I think one of the struggles for kids and teenagers with arthritis and other rheumatic diseases is it's kind of an invisible disease. So it's not obvious to others that they may be struggling or fatigued. And education is a big piece of that for the teachers and the coaches. And I think because of the variable nature of symptoms, that without education is difficult for people to understand why one day a child might be able to do fantastic in PE and the next day they're not wanting to move or they're unable to move as well. And sometimes that includes letting them know about the time of day, having PE class in the afternoon may be preferable if a child has morning stiffness. If you're on a sport team, then knowing the limitations, or if a child's tired and they need to be subbed, for example, then that's helpful for the coaches to know. And of course, if there's a disease flare, from a coaching perspective, I usually talk to them, this is kind of like an injury, we need to, I know it's not an injury, but they have that framework in their mind. They can understand a child might need to be out for a short period of time, and then we'll come back gradually and then resume their regular performance.
Yeah, and I think I'd echo that, like in both roles as an exercise physiologist and then someone who coaches. I always want to know when there's a medical issue for any of my athletes. And so I would say, like, I really want to have that conversation so that I know things to look for, and I can just be aware and watch out for some of those things as well.
Yeah, completely agree with both. Growing up playing sports, I was in a range of places where I was doing really well, and to the point where I even had to quit playing mid-season, both sports at the time. And I think throughout that journey, it was super important, again, for the coach to be aware. As for different asks and modifications, an occasional extra sub out, or maybe sitting out on some specific warm-ups or specific training routines or something like that was important. But like Dr. Houghton said, it is an invisible disease, so it is challenging for other teammates. Why is Ryan sitting out on the sideline while we're having to run laps and do all this? So it's all about kind of doing what you can, but just having that extra support from the coach and having them aware. I've done it both ways, where the coach wasn't aware and the coach was aware. And I was surprised to hear how willing the coach was to work with me and do all that, and treated me like just a regular kid, but was also there to help in case I needed to ask for a break or whatever it was. So yeah, definitely educating the coach. Maybe for me, I was most comfortable within my teammates, telling them myself. And when I viewed that was a good time to do so, just so there wasn't any extra special treatment that there might not have needed to be. But definitely all coaches are going to be receptive. Same when it comes to personal trainers as well. A good personal trainer should ask, if you decide to go that route, kind of what injuries you're working with, or how they can help modify certain things. So yeah, definitely communication is key.
And I think, just to add on to that, I think from my experience as well, one of the things that's hardest for teenagers is to feel different than everyone else who's around them. And so I think having that conversation with your teenager and then navigating that piece a little bit is also important, because I see a lot of teenagers who are like, I don't want my class to know I'm different. I don't want my teacher to know I'm different, and so on. So there's that nuance to it as well. So I think just having that communication with all parties is probably pretty important.
Okay, one question asking about supplements. Are supplements safe for kids with systemic JIA or other kids? And I think a sort of an additional question that's sort of linked to that is, does diet play a role in this at all?
Good questions. We actually have some slides on supplements because we thought that would come up. So let me move up for that. If anybody has questions about high intensity interval training, we can talk about that too. And so supplements, are they safe? How do they work? I think, a number of kids take supplements. Surveys of youth, this is from the US, but up to a third of them are taking supplements of some form or another. So it's very common. Short-term supplement use is generally safe in adults. There's very few studies on supplements by youth. And both the Canadian Pediatric Society and the American Academy of Pediatrics don't recommend supplements for youth unless there's specific reasons. So calcium and vitamin D, really important for bone health. In Canada, we recommend vitamin D from November to April because we just don't get enough sunlight. As pediatric rheumatologists or any other physicians that prescribe steroids, we recommend calcium and vitamin D when we're prescribing steroids because of bone health. Iron supplements are also really important for kids who might have anemia, and sometimes anemia of chronic disease has an element of iron deficiency as well. So those are some supplements that are more commonly given for a specific reason. If a child otherwise has a well-balanced diet, then generally we don't recommend supplements. A multivitamin is not unreasonable and is perfectly safe, but generally a well-balanced diet is the way to go. In terms of some specific supplements, I'll just really speak briefly about, and then answer the question about the diet. So some teenagers ask about creatine. We certainly have a number of patients who've asked about this. Essentially, this is a protein manufactured in the body from amino acids, or the building blocks of proteins. Does also come from food, but you can buy it as a supplement, and it does increase your ability to work out harder and longer. So particularly high intensity things, so working out at the gym, for example. It causes water retention, so hydration is really important, and it can cause your muscles to appear bigger as well because of the hydration. So some young people take it because it gives them the appearance of increased muscle bulk. It can lead to increased creatinine levels, which is a marker of renal function. So it's always important, if your child or if you're a teenager watching this are taking supplements, just let your physicians know, because it can affect how we interpret your blood work. It can cause some renal problems in people who have underlying renal or kidney disease. The other common things we get asked about is protein powder. Generally not necessary for most youth. Most of your dietary needs should be met through a varied diet. Again, too much protein powder can cause kidney stones. Probably the more real issue is that if kids are taking in a lot of their calories through protein powder, then they're decreasing their food intake and they're not getting a well-balanced diet. And then finally, the one thing actually Astrid and I wanted to touch base on was caffeine, because there's so much out there and so much marketing for these drinks like Prime or Red Bull, and really marketed directly to kids, and caffeine is not great for kids. It's not great for adults outside of a little bit of coffee, but it can boost your energy. It makes you feel less tired. It can enhance your concentration, but it can be a problem for kids who have any underlying conditions, and is not recommended for kids under age 12. Partly there's an addiction component to it as well, so it can affect behaviors and as well. In terms of diet, we don't recommend any particular diet for kids with rheumatic diseases. We generally recommend just a well-balanced diet. And I would say I believe that on the Cassie and Friends website, there is a talk about diet and inflammatory diseases. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's an excellent resource.
Awesome. That's a fantastic answer. Astrid, I think I heard you say that you've done coaching for gymnastics, and there's two questions here where parents are saying their child wants to do gymnastics and they're wondering if this is, safe and okay for a kid with arthritis or a kid with lupus and arthritis. And one parent saying, maybe should they do gym training before doing gymnastics? And I know I get questions about that too in clinic.
I actually have strength and conditioned figure skaters, so not gymnasts. But Kristen, do you have any specific thoughts around gymnastics?
No, again, I think it depends on the individual child. If they have the flexibility and the sort of capacity or physical literacy to do the gymnastic maneuvers at whatever age this child is, and they're able to do them, then absolutely, I think it's fine to do gymnastics. The only time we run into issues is with, like, if there's neck disease, then I think that has to be approached on a individual basis. Unfortunately, neck arthritis isn't that common, and having instability is really rare, but that would be something that I would want to assess. And then some children, if they have reduced range of motion of their wrists, and it doesn't mean they can't do gymnastics, we just modify some of the activities they're doing in it. But certainly recreational gymnastics, and we've had at least one very competitive gymnast that went through our program and is now a physiotherapist, actually, working with some of our patients.
That's amazing.
Can you please talk about whether high intensity training is safe to do? Is it more safe than weights because you're not lifting heavy things?
All right, I'm going to put up our slides and let Astrid take this one, but we do have a couple slides on that.
Yeah, and I can just start by maybe even saying, well, maybe I'll wait for your slides, Kristen. I still
Can you
don't.
see it?
I can't see them now.
Oh, do I have to slide share again?
Probably.
Sorry, you go ahead and start and I'll see if I can slide share again.
Yeah, so high intensity interval training is something that's coming up a lot, and there's a lot of research around high intensity interval training and some of the benefits of it. And there's lots of research that is looking at high intensity interval training in lots of different populations. What high intensity interval training is, it involves repeated short bouts of maximum effort exercise, alternating with periods of rest and recovery. And lots of people right now are sort of training in that sort of way. It's also very similar to how kids play. It's really stop, start. And so it really kind of reflects their activity patterns. The reason why there's so much research into this is because it's really time efficient. And we know that it can be really beneficial for both physical and mental health. People who are into it like it for its efficiency. Some people don't like it because they feel like it's too hard. So you kind of have to figure out what kind of person you are. If you want to be like in and out of the gym and get, the biggest bang for your buck, high intensity interval training is probably a good way to go. But if you don't like that feeling of being pushed all the time and working to your max all the time, maybe high intensity interval training isn't for you. So I think, when it comes to what do we choose, like high intensity versus moderate intensity, I think that takes a little bit of an analysis of who we are and what we are hoping to get from exercise. And what I always say is like, do what you love or do what you're going to continue to be able to do. So, like I said, just having those kind of conversations with yourself is probably an important thing. Kristen, do you want to speak to it in terms of JA?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of, is HIIT training okay for kids with rheumatic diseases? There are studies that show that it is really helpful in adults with rheumatoid arthritis. It's both improving joint function, so joint range of motion. It also benefited weight control and decreased need for pain medicine in adults with arthritis. There's very little study in younger people, but it does appear to be safe and might improve health outcomes in children with JIA and other rheumatic diseases as well. There's studies in pediatrics, so it's safe in pediatrics. It just hasn't quite been studied in all the different disease populations. And as Astrid said, it's really more how kids do activities, is like these short little bursts. And some people call them like activity snacks, or some classrooms have been involved in studies. A couple of people from UBC that Lori and I have worked with on the LEAP project were involved in a quite simple study where it was called Bounce at the Bell, I think. And so every day, a few times a day, this ringer would go off in elementary school. The kids would get up and they do these big jumps, knees to chest. And they actually showed that over the course of the year that just that minimal intervention, the kids improve their bone health because they're doing these impact exercises. So it doesn't take very much. And I think that's maybe something else that we didn't stress, is that any amount of activity is better than no activity, and any increase in activity is good for your health. Sometimes people get really nervous, or they're daunted by the 60 minutes a day. That's so much. And 60 minutes is a guideline. More is better, but any more than what you're doing is an improvement. And I think that we don't need to be hard on ourselves if we're not always checking off those boxes. Just try to do the best you can on the day. And I know I've seen some people actually in the stairwells here doing running stairs, like in between their little breaks, because that's basically your high intensity interval training. Maybe you can do it at work. You don't have time for other things.
And then I would just say too, why I kind of like high intensity interval training in kids is because of their attention span. So you're always switching exercises and you're switching things. And so they're not getting bored doing things. If you're all constantly changing things, that I find is really engaging for them.
Okay. I'm going to give one last question and then it'll be probably time to kind of wrap up. And I think this question might be for Ryan, and maybe you can sort of give a short answer for this, but how would you recommend that someone advocate for themselves when their coaches or teachers don't seem to understand their condition well?
Yeah, it's a great question. The way that I did it for myself, I did it in a bit of a unique way. In high school, bullying, that was something I was concerned about, people not understanding the condition, whether that's friends, teachers, coaches, whatever it might have been. I actually ended up doing a fundraiser for arthritis, and posted that on my social media, and kind of did it that way and shared my story that way. That way I got it out to the general mass without having to have personal conversations with a bunch of people, and may it be awkward or whatever it may be. I did that for kind of peers and things like that. As to a coach and a teacher, really just standing up for yourself, explaining it as an injury and not just like inflammation or something in that regard. It very much could be an injury, especially for me. I've got some hip damage that will never go away as a result of the inflammation. So it is very much essentially just an injury, a severe injury that people have to work with for the rest of their lives. So just understanding that people understand the severity of it, and that it's not just the inflammation or anything like that. I think that's just the general consensus. People just think it's for old people, and you just get a little bit stiff, but no, it's serious pain and it needs to be managed. Telling people you have to take medication. I take an injection every 2 weeks, and I've done that since I was 16. And so, those kinds of things help people understand what it actually is, and that it's not just a stiffness for an old person. So.
I think that's a great way to sort of finish off the session and also our question and answer session. I am really, I feel like we've been just really fortunate to have some really terrific speakers, and I myself have learned a lot from all three of you. So I'm going to turn the session over to Jennifer Wilson, who's the Executive Director of Cassie and Friends.
Hi, everyone. I get the pleasure of finishing up our classroom session tonight, and I just want to thank all of our speakers so very much. I want to thank our moderator, Dr. Lori Tucker, our patient speaker, Ryan Decker, as well as Astrid D'Souza and Dr. Kristen Houghton from BC Children's Hospital. This was a really amazing session, so much information, as well as resources shared in the chat. So please do take a look in there. Two things that I wanted to point out that were great about this session was that success was just beginning. And Dr. Houghton said that so clearly. And so I know I personally feel motivated to get active after this session. And there's lots of things we as parents and caregivers and friends can do to help kids and youth with rheumatic diseases keep active and learn to love what their bodies can do. Two of the ways that Cassie and Friends gets kids and their families active, of course, are our Team Cassie and Friends run walks that are in cities all across Canada, as well as a virtual program online. And this year we had 750 kids, families, and friends run all across Canada. And then in the chat, there's a link to the Youth Mentorship Program, which I know has been a really valuable source for teens to talk to other young adults with rheumatic diseases, people like Ryan Decker, who can share their personal experience and some of those tips and tricks, and even just understanding of some of the challenges that might come with having rheumatic disease and wanting to pursue physical activity. Of course, you'll see on the screen our sponsors. I'd love to thank Nicola Wealth Management, AbbVie, Amgen, and Sobi, who's been so instrumental in helping us deliver this educational content to our Canadian pediatric rheumatic disease community. We'll go to the next slide. This session will soon, in the coming weeks, be housed on a virtual education library, but a couple other sessions that were pointed out tonight are amazing resources on nutrition in pediatric rheumatic disease, transition. So if you have a youth who is preparing to transition out of pediatric care, we do have a physical activity page in a previous session, as well as lots of information on medications, mental health, a JIA 101 session, as well as other sessions on some of the more rare rheumatic diseases, including myositis. Next slide, please. Yes, so all of these, you can see that even more broken down, but really what I want to point out is that if you have a question about your child or family's journey with rheumatic disease, be sure to check out the Cassie and Friends website. And if you have suggestions, we are always open to hear for other topics that you'll be interested in. Next slide. One of the really exciting events coming up that I wanted to let everyone know about is that family days and family conferences have been one of the cherished programs at Cassie and Friends for many, many years, really since our beginnings. And this will be our first session back on May 5th, 2024, just outside of Toronto, Ontario, in a place called King City, which is just north of Vaughan. And at this event, we look very much forward to welcoming kids, their siblings, family members, experts like we had here speaking today. The kids will do an amazing program, an age-based program divided into 4 age groups, and the parents will have a chance to really learn and connect with other families. I encourage everyone to save the date and watch for more information to come. And if you're not in Ontario, I just wanted to say that this is going to be a program that we look forward to bringing back across Canada. So again, watch the Cassie and Friends website and sign up for our newsletter to ensure you know about when Family Day is coming to your town. Next slide. So until Family Day happens, we're going to be hard at work planning, but there is always support available for you within our Juvenile Arthritis Canada private Facebook group. As you can see, we have almost 675 members there, and the conversations, the tips, the support that parents can find there is really uncomparable. So we're really pleased to be able to facilitate this forum online for parents to connect. And I encourage you to join if you haven't joined. Next slide. So lastly, again, if you have suggestions for content, if you want to follow us on social media, we really encourage you to keep in touch. Cassie and Friends is a really vibrant community, everything from our runs to our education sessions, to email contact between our staff and families, or our parent mentors or youth mentors. We really are here for you and this community. Next slide. Yes, and lastly, we're getting into the season of giving, but Cassie and Friends works really hard to provide all of this content, connection, events, and we do appreciate if you're thinking of a donation through the end of the year to really consider making us a contribution to Cassie and Friends so that we can keep bringing information and connection to youth and their families. The pediatric rheumatic disease community is very dear to our hearts, and we are committed to bringing more and more resources and research across Canada. So with that, I want to thank our speakers one last time, and I thank everyone here for attending the session tonight, and have a good evening.